I've seen Hereditary twice now, and aside from the fact that there is clearly something wrong with me, both times I left the theater to find audience members discussing the possible meaning behind several key elements in Ari Aster's terrifying directorial debut. There is, of course, no concrete answer. Whatever you make of Hereditary is what you make of it. But if you're hoping to make sense of particular plot points, some of the cryptic imagery, and that unforgettable ending, we're here to help. It should go without saying, but there are major spoilers for Hereditary ahead. You've been warned. Hereditary opens with the death of Annie's mother, Ellen. The two had a strained relationship, as evidenced by her dispassionate eulogy at her mother's funeral. Following the funeral, Annie begins noticing strange symbols and words around her home. Her family experiences a relentless series of tragedies that appear to be linked to their grandmother's passing. Or are they? These include the horrible death of Annie's young daughter, Charlie, after she spends the night out with her brother, Peter. Hereditary is a thematically heavy horror film that explores grief, trauma, and, clearly, the meaning of inheritance. It transforms the concept of family demons into something that's both literal and existentially unsettling. Let's start with the symbols. The film is littered with clues about an actual demon. Though you may have noticed a few, a second viewing reveals others that were hiding in plain sight all along. The first and most obvious is the symbol on the necklace worn by Annie and her mother. Like many things in the film, it can be interpreted more than one way. Either there's something witchy and supernatural about this symbol, or it's just one of those corny things from a special Mother's Day collection at Zales. This symbol recurs throughout the film, appearing in old photos, a book, on a foam pole, embroidered welcome mats, and later in Joan's apartment. Joan befriends Annie at a grief support group. It isn't until the third act that the supernatural force behind this symbol is revealed to be a demon named Paimon. And yes, Paimon is the real name of a demon written about in several occult texts and grimoires, some of which date all the way back to the 15th and 16th centuries. The necklace in the film is Paimon's actual sigil. You can even purchase your own version of this necklace on Etsy, though I probably wouldn't advise it unless you want everyone you love to die a horrible death. In Hereditary, Paimon is hailed as one of the 8 kings of hell. Those who worship him, including Joan, believe that they will be blessed with abundant wealth after he inhabits a human body. Often described as crowned and one of the many kings in Lucifer's service, Paimon is a science nerd, an appreciator of the arts, and a nature lover who is said to hold all the secrets of Earth. Other texts claim he will truthfully answer any question asked of him.
I never wanted to be your mother.
Or that he can reveal hidden treasures. Like her mother, Charlie is also highly creative, but are her demented tchotchkes and drawings merely the result of a quirky, imaginative mind? Or are they something more sinister? The artistic connection between Charlie and her mother serves as the most surface component of the film's inheritance metaphor. Are Charlie's talents inherited from her mother? Or are they a ritual compulsion beyond her control? Are Annie and her family being tormented by a supernatural force? Or is Annie manifesting signs of a mental illness she inherited from her own mother? There is no right or wrong answer here. In every instance, it's both. After her grandmother dies, Charlie sits in class fiddling with her latest creation. When her teacher asks her to stop, a pigeon flies into the window. Later that day, Charlie finds the dead bird and cuts off its head to append to the figure she's made. Headlessness and decapitation are a recurring motif in the movie. The psychoanalyst Carl Jung once said that beheading is significant symbolically as the separation of the understanding from the great suffering and grief which nature inflicts on the soul. Which sounds like he's describing this movie, to be honest. Ants are another recurring image. The ants that covers Charlie's head when she's decapitated in the car accident, the ones that crawl over Annie's bed, cover Peter's head during a nightmare sequence. Symbolically, ants are drawn to death, and pigeons, like the one that crashed into the window, are messengers who sometimes carry warnings. That the pigeon appears early in the film doesn't feel coincidental. Charlie's bedroom is also where one of the strange words are scratched into the walls of Annie's home, presumably left there by her superstitious mother. These words include Satoni, Liftoch, and Pandemonium, all commonly used in spells and incantations to conjure demons, you know, like Paimon. Before we get into how all the demonology and symbolism culminates in that insane ending, I want to talk a bit about the themes of mental illness and Hereditary. During one of her grief support group meetings, Annie reveals that her father suffered from psychotic depression and starved himself to death. Her brother was a schizophrenic who hanged himself, and her mother had dissociative identity disorder, which was once known as multiple personality disorder. There's been plenty of real-world research to suggest that mental illness can run in the family, and several psychiatric disorders can be genetically passed down, including schizophrenia and depression. So Annie's husband is somewhat justified in believing that his wife is in need of professional help. To him, Annie's behaviors are signs of mental illness, such as manic episodes, hallucinations, obsessive-compulsive superstitions, like believing Peter will die if she doesn't destroy her dead daughter's sketchbook, which may or may not be possessed, and speaking in Charlie's voice during a seance, which could be a sign of DID. There's also Annie's history of sleepwalking, which returns after Charlie's death. As Annie confesses in the film, many years ago, Annie awoke in the room that Charlie and Peter shared when they were younger. The kids were covered in paint thinner, and Annie was holding an empty can and a lit match. Obviously, she blew the match out, but that horrible experience has lingered in her mind for years. These episodes could also be considered dissociative fugues. Though not necessarily a symptom of mental illness, entering a fugue state can be related to dissociative identity disorder and prolonged trauma. When in a fugue state, the subject experiences a sort of temporary amnesia where they forget about basic identifiers like their name, where they live, their personality, and memories. These states can last days, weeks, or months at a time. There is also psychological research to suggest that, like mental illness, the pain of severe trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next, specifically trauma-induced behavioral disorders. Again, Hereditary asks if Annie and her children are predisposed to mental illness and doomed to experience repeated traumas, or if these tragedies are the result of individual choices. The ending of Hereditary is a relentless barrage of revelations and terrifying imagery, but it's also an exquisite culmination of the film's devastating themes. Everything comes together in quick succession, so it's easy to miss something if you're watching from between your fingers, and I don't blame you. To recap, after Annie finds the headless corpse of her mom in the attic and photos of her mother and Joan together wearing those necklaces, the shit truly hits the fan. Annie discovers a book that belonged to her mother. There's a highlighted passage about resurrecting the demon Paimon in the body of a human male. And Paimon is seen holding 3 heads, which we'll get back to in a moment. At school, Peter sees Joan standing across the street shouting, "I expel you," not long after he has what can only be described as an episode in class. He hallucinates a smirking version of himself reflected in a nearby glass. His eye twitches and his arm shoots straight up in the air with his palm flexed at an odd angle, and then he smashes his own face into the desk as if compelled to do so by some unseen force. Annie tells her husband about her mom's dead body, and tries to convince him to destroy Charlie's sketchbook to protect Peter from possession. But he resists, so Annie throws the sketchbook into the fireplace herself, and her husband is engulfed in flames. Annie corners Peter in the attic and saws her own head off with a wire, the ultimate sacrifice made for her child and his future. And that's 3 dead family members, which happens to be the same number of heads Paimon was holding in that photo. Members of his dead grandmother's cult suddenly surround him, and Peter jumps out of the window, seemingly to his death. But then he wakes up, with a dazed look in his eye, and follows Annie's decapitated body as it floats up to their treehouse, where he finds Joan and several nude members of the demonic cult bowing and chanting before him, including this creepy dude who was at Ellen's funeral. Charlie's decapitated head sits on top of the statue of Paimon, which is posed in the exact same manner as Peter was before he smashed his face at school. Joan tells Peter/Paimon that they have corrected his female body with a healthy male body. If you'll remember, earlier in the film, Annie told Joan that when she gave birth to Peter, she kept him away from Ellen to protect him from her mental illness. But when she had Charlie, she gave her to Ellen as a consolation prize of sorts. This gesture, though symbolic in Annie's mind, cemented the fate of her children. After Ellen dies, Annie comforts Charlie by reminding her that she was Ellen's favorite. "She wanted me to be a boy," Charlie says. Charlie is typically a boy's name, after all. Since Paimon can only inhabit the body of a male, Ellen caused Charlie's death and proceeded to isolate Peter, giving the demon only one place to go. In the end, a crown is placed upon Peter's head as the cult bows before him. While the literal meaning of this scene is chilling enough, it's the existential implications that are truly upsetting. An entire history of familial tragedy and trauma, of pain and mental illness has been foisted upon him. That crown represents a burden, a weight beyond measure. What appears to be a twisted celebration is a moment of horrible defeat, as Peter's given no choice, but he is chosen. You could easily read more into this sequence, like the concept of white male privilege. For instance, Annie and Charlie are extremely talented. Annie's pieces even speak to how her personal trauma informs her art. Peter doesn't appear to be remarkable in any way. He's a careless stoner teenager preoccupied with getting laid, and yet he is chosen. His sister is unworthy, her life deemed of no value based entirely on her gender, despite her stronger connection to Ellen. Joan corrected the original body with a healthy male body, as if the female gender is a mistake that needs fixing. Ultimately, we're left with the film's most indelible image, Peter, the king of pain, who fell into his position by virtue of nothing more than circumstance. Thanks for watching, everyone. And please let me know what you think of Hereditary's ending in the comments. And if you're here for the first time, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Britt Hayes.